Today on the Take On Board podcast, I'm speaking with Carmel Mulhern about board agendas. This is part of the Board Composition and Effectiveness 5-part mini-series. So let's get into the conversation today. But before we do that, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, I'm on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay my respects to any First Nations people who may be listening today. I acknowledge their continuing connections to land, waters, skies, culture and country. I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and I encourage others in the Take On Board community to do the same. Now, let me tell you about Carmel. Carmel is on the PwC Governance Board, the Australian Cancer Research Foundation, Methodist Ladies College Board, Telstra Foundation Board, and the Advisory Board of Centre for AI and Digital Ethics. She was formerly on the boards of Telstra Super, Sydney Institute, and Justice Connect. Carmel is a seasoned executive with more than 25 years' experience as a trusted advisor to boards and CEOs within the financial services, superannuation, telecommunications, media, technology, and manufacturing industries, through periods of digital disruption and strategic transformation. Most recently, Carmel served as Group General Counsel and Head of Governance at the Commonwealth Bank, driving the fair and efficient resolution of legal matters, rebuilding of stakeholder trust and effective corporate governance. Prior to the Commonwealth Bank, she spent almost 20 years at Telstra in various roles, including General Counsel and Head of Corporate Affairs. Welcome to the Take On Board podcast, Carmel.
Thanks, Helia.
It is so glorious to have you here.
I'm excited about the conversation.
So, Carmel, before we dig into board agendas and how that relates to board effectiveness, which I'm looking forward to doing, but as always, before we do that, I would love to dig a little bit deeper about you. So tell me, where were your parents born and do you know where your ancestors are from?
Well, Helia, I come from a very Irish background. So my mum and dad were both born in Ireland on the west coast, County Roscommon and County Mayo, and they came to Australia in the mid-60s. My dad was working on the Snowy River hydro scheme, and so the plan was that they would come to Australia for 2 years, and here we are, 60 years later. So I do know where my ancestors from, and I do have lots and lots of them. My dad was one of 13, and so there are lots of Mulherns on the west coast of Ireland.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm thinking about a trip to Ireland in the next couple of years. I'll come back to you about that.
Okay.
So what about you? Where were you born and where did you grow up? And what about your family unit? Is there siblings? How does that come together?
There are. So I grew up, Helia, in Brisbane on the lands of the Turrbal and the Jagera people. Most of my immediate family is still there, my mum, my sister and brother. So I've got a younger brother and a younger sister. I moved to Melbourne almost 30 years ago now. So like you, on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people, and I am still here. I feel that this is my home. My partner's here and I've got 3 children doing school and university here in Melbourne.
Well, we're very glad to have you here. I suspect I would have met you at about 30 years ago when you came to Melbourne many moons ago. So I'm very glad that we've got to keep you here in downtown Melbourne. It's lovely. So with your Irish background, or indeed maybe others, how many languages, if any, like I'm perhaps a typical Australian and don't speak any other languages other than English, unless you count Duolingo Italian, which I don't. So how many languages do you speak?
Damn, I was going to count my Duolingo French as a
well, yours might be better than my Duolingo Italian.
So I speak, I did French at school. I do not profess to have anything other than being able to order a coffee or a bagel, but I have, as one of my New Year's resolutions, decided to reactivate my Duolingo in French. So I'm not sure if I'm improving, but I'm certainly having fun each day as that pops up.
Excellent. Note to self afterwards, Carmel, I might need to friend you on Duolingo. I've got a few people there and it's kind of fun.
Oh, I've been too embarrassed to friend anyone. I'm just...
Oh, they don't get to see. You just do. Oh, look, I love duo in a way, but it's just the gamification of language in a way, and it makes you
Yeah.
anyway.
Mm.
So you touched on this a moment ago, but I wonder, where do you feel your place or your home is?
I do feel my home is Melbourne, and why do I feel that? I love the seasons. I love the culture. There's something, I have had to travel a lot in my executive life. And I have to say, every time I landed back in Melbourne, there was almost this, that lovely calmness. I really, really love living here, and it does feel like home.
Oh, well, like I say, we are very, very happy and fortunate to have you as in Melbourne as part of your home. So great for us to hear.
So, yeah.
All righty. Well, look, let's turn to board agendas. Let's get into the conversation of the day. So, as I said at the top of the episode, this is around almost board effectiveness, I guess, and board
Mm.
agendas. I don't know. Where should we start the conversation about board agendas, Carmel?
Well, I'm happy. When I started to think about this, I thought, well, how much is there to say about board agendas? When in fact, there is quite a lot to say. They're quite fundamental to having an effective board, and they've certainly changed a lot, Helia, in my time, starting way back from being an advisor in a law firm to corporates to where I am now. And I think perhaps sharing a little bit of the changes that I've seen during that time, I feel quite lucky. Lucky is probably an interesting word to use when you're talking about reviewing and experiencing board agendas, but I certainly have been an attendee at almost every CBA and Telstra board meeting over the last 16 years. So I have actually had an awful lot, and perhaps far too much for my liking at the time, involvement in agendas. But I have seen, when they're done well, how effective that they can be in ensuring that the board runs well, the chair is comfortable, the company's meeting its obligations. And it's a long way from the early days of, the co-sec putting a few bullet points on a piece of paper, running it in front of the chairman, who might look at it briefly and tick, that's the agenda for the next meeting. We are not in that world, but we certainly were when I was a young lawyer.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe I should say, it was not uncommon for that to be the way a board agenda was prepared.
Right. Oh, I almost want to go there, but I won't, because it sounds like that's not the most effectiveness for board agendas. So what is it today that boards should be thinking about, whether it's board chairs or even board members? Actually, I'd be interested to hear your reflections at some stage about the role of non-chairs and non-co-secs in the board agenda as well. But more broadly, what is it that chairs or boards or co-secs should be thinking about in building an effective board agenda?
I think, Helia, thinking about the purpose of the document. So like any document that directors receive or have, it shouldn't just be, we have this because that's the way we've always done it. Need to think about, and chairs need to do this in particular, think about what is the purpose of an agenda. And there's one purpose that has not changed, and that is it's there to ensure that you've got an effectively run board meeting. It's sort of a guardrail or a cheat sheet or a to-do list for the chair and the board as to what they need to go through in a meeting. And that's both from the sort of admin running side of it, and also making sure they've covered off all of the governance and compliance obligations that both the directors individually have and the company has to comply with. So I think that's its first. If it's not satisfying those fundamental purposes, it's not doing its job. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, there's got to be a real to be effective, it's really got to ensure that the decisions, the discussions, the noting papers are clear. What is it that each item is going to expect to happen? Has there been an appropriate time limit set for an item? I mean, if it's something for decision and it's strategically important, it shouldn't be given 10 minutes at the end of the day. You really need to think about where you put it and the order in which you put it. The best chairs I have seen working with COSEX and putting agendas together think about the logical flow of an agenda and thinking about it through the lens of the directors, remembering that the directors aren't executives. They're not living and breathing the company's work day in, day out. So they come back to a meeting every month or every 6 weeks or every couple of months. You need to make it as clear and logical as you can in terms of the flow and order of an agenda. I think the other thing, Helia, that's important is you've got to, particularly as the chair, the agenda is there to help all of those discussions that can take you down a rabbit hole, because everyone has different interests or different areas of expertise that they might want to dig into, and time is limited in a board meeting. So agendas help a chair keep things on track and reduce those off-topic discussions and stay strategic. It's very easy for boards, and particularly, dare I say it, new directors who are still adjusting or transitioning. And I know you've done a few podcasts on this. You know, what needs to change when you're sitting there as a director rather than an executive? You have to stay strategic. You can't, yes, you need to dig into the detail where you need to satisfy your duties or you need a question answered, but you've got to stay strategic and not get into the running of the company. And so a good agenda will help that. And I suppose my overarching point would be it helps you stop missing anything that shouldn't get missed.
Oh, it's such a, as you were talking, I was thinking it's both an art and a science, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah.
You know, I assume you pick up because I assume the individual board agendas for each meeting also connect back to the governance calendar overall, like what do we need to cover off in each meeting? Then you pick up the March, line in the governance calendar, and that starts the agenda. But you don't just pick it up and go, right, there's the agenda.
Yeah.
The art of it is, as you say, what's for noting, what's for discussion, how much time to leave, and so on.
You just touched on something that's really important and that almost gets forgotten when you're talking about a board agenda. There's almost 2 board agendas. So if you are a director, your responsibilities are for ensuring good corporate governance in the organisation. You can't do that if you're just going planning meeting to meeting. It's just like life. You can't really plan your life well if you're just going, and now tomorrow I'm doing this and tomorrow I'm doing this. Same with the board agenda. In February I'm doing this, in April I'm doing this. There also needs to be another agenda, which is the kind of annual agenda, and that's the calendar you were just referring to. So you're absolutely right, Helia, that annual calendar is something that's really important because it helps a board, and particularly, the chair, step back and say, okay, what work do we as a board need to get done during the year and where are we going to fit it in? And so you can kind of, again, look at the year and work out what's happening, or what is planned to happen, noting that nothing is set in stone and each company's circumstance will be different and will change over the year. So you've got to be flexible. You can't really have, here's the template that I've used every year forever as your annual calendar or your, board meeting agenda.
So with all of the things that end up both on the governance calendar and then, the March meeting and the agenda, sometimes it feels like there's more and more compliance-y, inverted commas, stuff to be done. And it feels like there's 27 items on the agenda that are for compliance and one, if you're lucky, that is a strategic conversation. And I think I heard you say a moment ago that board agendas are a really useful tool around keeping the conversation strategic.
Yeah.
What's the art behind that for company secretaries or for board chairs around Yeah, ensuring, even that what's up for decision, how much time is allocated, how does that actually work in practice?
It is hard because if you think about how, maybe it'll help with if I go through how I think agendas come together now. So again, that whole point around, co-sec or chair putting a few dot points down, or might have been a CEO giving it to a
Yes.
chair and saying, this is what we'll cover at the next meeting. Yep, fine.
Yes.
That's not the way it happens now. And there is never enough time to cover everything that everyone wants. And so you really need to think about, what is it that only the board can add value to, or can make the decisions on. And so that is an art. It involves a lot of communication, consultation, co-sec and chair and CEO relationships, really, really important. And so it'll differ in different organisations, but the gist of it will be that the co-sec has a role in working out, well, what have we said in the board calendar that we would do at this particular meeting? That goes on. There'll be some standard things that will probably appear in the agenda of every organisation: conflicts of interest, CEO report, procedural matters. They go on. We work out the timing and order later. Then you look at, well, what happened? Let's look at the minutes of the last meeting. What did we say we were going to do at the next meeting? So you've got those things that are carried over, both from an action list and from a good chair will not allow something to continue on an agenda if it's not ready to be discussed at the board. So they will either make a decision beforehand, or if it gets through the net and it's on the agenda, we'll say at the meeting, I'm going to hold this over to the next meeting. We either need more information, or it's not progressed enough, or we've run out of time. And really, if you're doing your job as a director and you're exercising due care and diligence, if you've got something really significant to either discuss or even more importantly, to make a decision on, you've got to give it the right time. So if there's anything like that that's been held over to the next meeting, you get that on. And then somehow you need to get into, what is it pertinent to management that needs to come up to the board. And that's where, the CEO, chair, CEO, co-sec, all that triangle is really important as to what is it that the CEO thinks needs to come up. And also, what does the chair, in consultation often with the other directors, feel that the board needs more on? So you're absolutely right. It is a juggle, and it becomes more and more so. What I've seen, Helia, is the Word document up there on screen, marked up, little bubbles on the side. This is this is here because X and X needs it, or that's linked to this decision we need to make in April, or we're going to have to move this down, or we've taken this. Like, it's a definitely a running feast until it gets locked down, and you've really got to lock it down with enough time for management to prepare papers that are, will help effective board decision making.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I love that. That lens of what can only the board do, I think is how you put it. I think that's a really lovely lens to put over it as the most important conversations, because I imagine you could easily, going through all of those, what's on the governance calendar, what did we come up with from the last set of minutes, what's the CEO saying? If you just put all of them, it's almost more important taking some stuff off than leaving it on, because otherwise that list could be a mile long.
Yeah. Because otherwise it then just becomes a tick the box or it could tick the box. Oh, we're on to the next one. We're on to the next one. There has got to be time to think and to discuss. So that's really important.
So you touched on a moment ago the chair, I get the other board directors. So if you're not the chair, you're not the co-sec, and you're not the CEO, you're a common garden variety board director. What have you seen? Is it through the chair? How does it work in terms of influence of the agenda? How do you get something on the agenda if you're not one of those three?
Well, what I've seen in work well is for there to be either express or at least informal protocols where directors raise with the chair items that they have got questions on or are worried about, and so that goes to the chair. The chair can then raise that generally with the CEO, and then the CEO can then make sure that the relevant executive addresses that in the meeting. I think that's probably the best practice. I wouldn't recommend a practice of directors going straight to management. That can happen if that's set up, and particularly if you're the chair of a committee, so a chair of a risk committee or a chair of a REM committee, you'll have a very strong relationship with the chief risk officer or the head of HR. But there does need to be, it can't be a free-for-all, and there needs to be some sort of rigour, coming back to that point about the role of director being strategic rather than operational. And so keeping some sort of guardrails and protocols around engagement with management isn't just being hierarchical, it's actually ensuring the right things are being discussed and that everyone has the same information. It's no good for one director to want to know the answer to something and ring, the CEO or the General Counsel, although the General Counsel does have a special role in being able to be independent and advise directors if they need it. But I think communication and flow of information amongst all directors is important, and the best way to do that is through the chair, making sure that things get on the agenda if they need to. And the other way it can come up, Helia, just in case we don't get, this doesn't come up later and I miss the point, but in an agenda, it's really good practice, I think, to have early on a CEO report as a standing agenda item, and by that there's normally a paper. I mean, that's standard, but in camera with the board session where the CEO can talk about things and the chair can talk about things and directors can talk about things that they're worried about with the CEO, without the rest of management there, and that might set the tone for the rest of the meeting. Or the CEO might say, well, I'll make sure so-and-so comes in and addresses that concern, rather than waiting for it to be a gotcha moment when the item comes up later on in the meeting. So, you think about it being what's going to produce the most effective outcome, ensuring that there is space on the agenda where things like that can be discussed. So the chair might say, okay, Director X, why don't you ask the CEO that in the closed session? Or the chair might say, in my regular discussions with the CEO, I know the answer to that and let me give you some context. And so the chair might be able to answer it.
Interesting. So would there be an in-camera session at the start, directors only?
Yes.
Then in camera with sorry, that was my phone. I left it on, so I'm just turning it off. So I'm going to do that again. So in-camera meeting at the start with just the board, then in camera with the CEO to go through the CEO report and just see if there's anything that needs to be picked up, and then you go into the board meeting. Is that the full board meeting? Obviously, the rest of it's board meeting. Interesting. Okay. I've seen, it's interesting, that one, and I think it requires strong chairing, because sometimes you end up having the board meeting before the board meeting. So it just, I think, requires quite strong chairing.
True. That is another good point, Helia.
Yeah. But, done well, it's a really good pickup because, interesting. Okay. Oh, see, agendas. Hidden or otherwise. They've got so much in there. Let's do it this way. What should I have asked you, Carmel, that I haven't?
Well, I don't think you should have asked me anything else, Helia, but there were a couple of things, because I sort of was thinking that's what I'll talk about. And then I thought, actually, agendas have many other purposes that might be subtle or not as obvious, but from a governance and board effectiveness. And I'll be quick, but I think just touching on those are important too. So I think a really good agenda gives direction. It gives direction to management. It tells management what is a priority, what is important, and it's kind of analogous with what gets reported gets done. You can apply that to a board agenda. If you've got to report to the board, you've probably got a more likelihood of it being done and prioritised. And I think that is particularly important when you're thinking about things like strategy execution. And so an agenda can, I think, reduce the risk, or at least increase the risk of strategy being executed, because if you've got this regular rhythm where you've got to report up to the board on how things are going, you're more likely to pivot if things are going wrong, or stay on track. You fail fast or pivot if you've got to keep reporting up on it, rather than it sort of being unknown until the next annual strategy day. So I think it's helps with strategy execution, gives direction, and ensures that there's a thinking time, place for short, medium, long-term thinking, and items that might get dropped off. So I think as social, environmental, all sorts of other issues that hadn't traditionally been on the board agenda in a real way are really important. Reputation, all those things can now get their right place on a board agenda. I think if I think about directors' duties, it helps directors work out what they can do to prepare. So, of course, they've got to read the papers, but if you've got the agenda there, you can be used as a prompter. Okay, I need to do some pre-thinking on that, and that will make me a more valuable contributor to the discussion. I think it also helps in having a regular conversation between board and management in a structured way, so that in this whole world now of agile decision-making and everything going faster than it ever has before, if boards have to make decisions under pressure, they're more likely to be able to do that if they've had an ongoing sort of discussion. And I think the agenda can facilitate that. The other thing, and this is it's slightly counterintuitive, but I think agendas can help set culture. Now, we don't have time to go into what is board culture and corporate culture. But if you think about culture as the way we do things around here, I think an agenda, the board agenda, really gives an indication of or can underpin a positive culture. What you talk about at the board and focus on really sends a message on what is important, so that was my earlier point, but I think that can set culture. And finally, Helga, you'd expect me to say this as a former general counsel, black hat, agendas help. If you find yourself in a royal commission or in a witness box and you need to be able to satisfy someone, particularly a judge, that you've met your director's duties, not unhelpful to be able to say, well, look, every meeting for a year we discussed this topic and we spent 10 minutes on it. If you spent 5 minutes on strategy once a year, well, that would be quite telling as to whether or not you satisfied your duties. The flip side of that is it can be a real positive to show that, yes, with the benefit of hindsight, we might have done something differently, but it's not because we weren't being diligent and working with the best information that we had at the time. So I think it's really important there.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, isn't it? I think we often think about minutes being, the legal document that will be called upon, but it's not just the minutes.
No, exactly.
It could be board papers, possibly. It could be, definitely could be board agendas. There's other board documents. Yeah, I
mean, the minutes are the record, but the agenda is not unhelpful to have there as well, because
absolutely. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Carmel, so much in here. What are the key things you want people to take away about board agendas from the conversation that we've had today?
I would say, Helga, think about board agendas not just as another document in the board pack. Think of them as critical to the effectiveness of the board. You need to the more time you spend on getting your agenda right should make for a more effective running meeting and better papers, because it will be understood what it is that the board is wanting to look at. Boards have limited time, and so it's really important that you have an agenda that will ensure an orderly conduct of meeting,
Yeah.
and that you do everything that you're supposed to do. But don't just limit the thinking about agendas to governance. It's also, as I say, a document that can really maximise strategic execution, make it clear what's important and a priority for the board, help you satisfy your directors' duties, and a bunch of other things.
Fantastic. Is there a resource you would like to share with the Take on Board community?
I would. I was trying to think of what's the one, because I feel like I read quite a lot of things, but probably one of the best things I read last year was the 2024 keynote speech at the AICD Governance Summit. It was given by Catherine Livingstone, who I've had the privilege of working with as chair both at Telstra and CBA. And in that speech, she covers a whole lot of really interesting points, and particularly looking at governance through the lenses of the what, the how, and the who. And I just think hearing from someone who is that experienced, and I would say the director who, I've never seen a director who is more hardworking, courageous, and has this unique ability to think short, medium, long-term strategically, whilst at the same time having a focus on and memory for detail. It's an amazing set of skills to have, and some of that comes out in the speech that she gave at the summit.
Fantastic. I will find a link and pop that in the show notes for people. I was at the Governance Summit last year, and it was an amazing keynote for them to have. Are you going this year to the Australian Governance Summit, Carmel?
I plan to. Are you, Helia?
I am. Awesome.
Great.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to think about board agendas, to share your wisdom with the Take on Board community. And in fact, before I finish, I must also say congratulations on being one of the very few women in Australia. I don't know how many are exactly doing it, but as the AICD Chairs Mentoring Program, getting a spot
thank
there.
you, Helia. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
I'm really looking forward to that, as I've a year into transitioning from executive life into non-executive. It'll be invaluable. I'm very grateful.
Well, we might get you back to talk about board culture, or about how boards can influence culture, or about the Chairs Mentoring Program. There's plenty of reasons we can get you back, Carmel, at some stage in the future.
Thanks, Helia. Happy to. You do a great. Can I just do a plug? As these recordings are really, really helpful. So thank you for the great work that you do.
Oh, thank you. Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on the Take on Board podcast today.
Thanks, Helia. Bye, everyone.